In this video, I will show you the full lineup that you need to succeed, plus bonus picks at every position for the Week 6 main slate NFL contest on DraftKings in 5 minutes or less. My name's Quick Pick Nick, and having compared personally calculated projections with every player's price featured on DraftKings, here are your primary picks for this Sunday, October 18th. If you enjoy this kind of fast-paced calculated content, subscribe and stay tuned for more lineups throughout the season, including an afternoon-only slate going live tomorrow and a couple of single-game slates to follow. Starting off the lineup similarly to my FanDuel video, which is linked in the description below, my model recommends our primary quarterback to be Ryan Fitzpatrick. There's really not much more to be said that I haven't already covered in that FanDuel video from yesterday, but to summarize, Fitzpatrick has scored less than 25 fantasy points from weeks 2 through 5, which is a streak my model and I both expect to continue against the porous Jets defense who's vulnerable to, well, basically everything, so week 6 should be no different for the Magic Man. The secondary picks at this position are both cheaper options, so if you want to save some more money, look to take Gardner Minshew for $6,400, or for even less, Joe Burrow at $5,400 on DraftKings. Minshew has a pretty solid track record in 2020 that looks a bit like the magician Fitzmagic's, with only one game falling below 20 fantasy points, but for Burrow, my model chose him in particular because he is significantly cheaper than most options and should be able to produce around 18 fantasy points given that his O-line doesn't let the defense absolutely slaughter him in the pocket. Moving on, for our primary running backs, my model picked Mike Davis and David Montgomery. Davis has been all reliable for Carolina and has taken over McCaffrey's workload almost 1-to-1, recording an average of just over 25 fantasy points per game during the past 3 weeks. As for Montgomery, he's also trying to fill in for lost space in Chicago's backfield with Tariq Cohen out for the season, and although not as explosive as Davis, Montgomery has filled in quite alright, scoring 11 and 19 fantasy points during his 2 most recent contests. His price is pretty good on DraftKings too, running you for only $5,800. For the secondaries, my model chose Kareem Hunt, Devontae Freeman, and Jamal Williams. Hunt is another backup whose first stringer got injured, so he'll have an increased workload, which is very promising in Cleveland, where they like to run the ball, as is Freeman with Saquon Barkley hurt, who's a cheaper option who is seemingly starting to heat up. If you want to go even cheaper though, my program found a minimum cost player who has no business being ranked this low. Jamal Williams is a great change of pace back for Rodgers in Green Bay, and only dropped below 8 fantasy points once this season, so if you want at least 8 fantasy points on a tight budget, Williams is your best option there. For the receivers, the primaries here are Jamison Crowder, Adam Thielen, and Kenny Golladay. Crowder has not shown even a hint of disappointment during 2020, scoring over 20 fantasy points in every game he's played so far, with at least 10 targets in each. Thielen is another player who may be starting to get hot at this point in the season, scoring 29.2 and 29.3 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks, with 10 and 13 targets in each respectively. He's also relatively cheaper on DraftKings compared to FanDuel, which is why he's a primary in this video as opposed to a tertiary in yesterday's. Another player who is relatively cheaper on DraftKings is Kenny Golladay, who at only $6,200 has been able to score over 16 fantasy points in both of the games he has been able to play so far, with a touchdown in each. Moving on to the secondary receivers, my model chose Calvin Ridley, Robbie Anderson, Allen Robinson, and Laviska Shenault. Ridley is more valuable in this PPR format as he's been targeted over 10 times in all but one contest this season, so he could be worth that extra bunts. Anderson and Robinson were both primaries in the FanDuel video, whereas Shenault was a secondary, so in order to keep things brief, if you want a deeper explanation of their upsides, that video is still linked in the description. The primary tight end in this DraftKings lineup is another carryover from the FanDuel lineup, Jhanu Smith, simply because he hasn't fallen below 10 fantasy points this season and has surpassed 20 twice while still being ranked as the 5th most expensive at the position. If you're looking for other options, Robert Tanyan and Zack Ertz are both cheaper picks. The hesitance with Tanyan is due to Davante Adams' potential return, and while Ertz is the main tight end left in Philly, he isn't a primary either because Smith is just better. Finally, the tertiary, meaning he's the best choice we've got at this point, but is replaceable by secondaries if you do have that remaining budget left in your own lineup, is Travis Fulgham. Ranking only $400 more than the minimum receiver cost, Fulgham could be the most valuable player come Sunday, as he was a popular target in week 5 with 10 receptions and has produced during the past 2 weeks, averaging 24 fantasy points per game. Our defense uses up the remaining cash, which has to be the Bengals, but that's not necessarily a bad option, as aside from the Cleveland blowout in week 2, Cincinnati is averaging nearly 5 points per game, even with a packed history, including Baltimore and the Chargers. That's what my model was able to come up with for this episode of Primary Picks for the main slate of the NFL in Week 6, this Sunday, October 18th. This has been Quick Pick Nick, the intersection for sports, data analysis, and speed. Thanks for watching.